Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the 2021 MAC conference. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's programs. If you joined us this morning for our meditation session, we apologize that it wasn't able to take place. It was scheduled as a live event, and there was some time zone confusion with our presenter. We are working to get a recording uploaded so you can view it later on. Our next presentation, the presentation happening right now, is called Out of the Box, the Multi-Channel Museum by Mark Yokoyama. This session is pre-recorded and it will be followed by a live Q&A with our presenter. Mark loves questions, so please use the chat to pose it up. Please use the Q&A feature to pose a question or two. We'll now get started.
Hi, this is Mark Yokoyama from La Fuita Mare and Amuseum Naturalis on St. Martin in the Northeast Caribbean. I'm really happy to be at this MAC conference, and I'm sure that it's going to be fantastic. And my presentation is Out of the Box, the Multi-Channel Museum. So, excuse me one sec. My topic is the multi-channel museum, and multi-channel just means using different channels like online, print, social media, your physical location, etc., to reach your audience. The need for a multi-channel museum became obvious during the pandemic. For us, lockdown meant we couldn't be open and people weren't allowed to visit. Even when we could reopen, there were restrictions and choices that we made that limited what we could do in person on site. Probably everyone had a similar moment of wondering, how do we serve our community when we can't be a museum? And probably everyone has also come up with some creative solutions over the last year and a half. And moving forward, even if things return to normal, so to speak, museums need to keep using other channels, not just because there could be another crisis, but also because it could be a better way of reaching people. Our association is an all-volunteer nonprofit association on St. Martin with a mission to provide education on local nature, heritage, and culture. We do it in different ways with books, events, short films. We started our museum, Amuseum Naturalis, as a pop-up in 2016. And by the time we launched in a permanent location in 2018, it was really our main project. It has exhibits about nature, heritage, and culture. It has gardens and viewpoints and poetry meadow, and it's completely free for individuals and groups. And it really became the focal point of what we do, but it's still one of many projects that we have going on. And since our mission is education, not specifically to run a museum, I think it made it a little easier for us to pivot during the pandemic. So the pandemic created barriers to access, and it also highlighted existing barriers to access. It became really easy to see the limitations of two of the primary channels used by museums, a physical location and an online presence. So physical access was limited by lockdowns, but also it was always an issue for us, even on a small island, even though our museum was free. Kids might need parents to bring them. Teachers struggled to organize buses through the school system. So by limiting our reach to the in-person visit, it reduces the impact we can make. Also, online access is limited by technology access. We've always shared all of our stuff online for free, but people don't necessarily have the internet connection. They don't have an appropriate device for using the content. And it became really clear when a lot of students weren't attending online class during the lockdown. And here, even 4 years after Hurricane Irma, a lot of places still are not properly wired for internet connections. So our multi-channel approach was largely supported by digital technologies that gave us a greater reach in the real world. Amuseum at Home was the first thing we launched in response to the pandemic, and we released daily activities, ebooks and short films on our website and social media. And this was primarily a digital campaign. So we knew a lot of people weren't being reached, but we also found out that people were just printing and distributing some of our activity pages and stuff to places like group homes for kids. So it's an online channel that can also become a print channel when the content is printable. We're not a typical museum. Essentially, all our exhibit space is outdoors. Physically, we have more in common with a garden or a park. And because of this, we were able to reopen in a park mode where people could have a self-guided outdoor experience. And the location was not staffed. People could just roam around on their own, and we expanded the hours to sunrise to sunset every day. So with a low visitor volume spread out over all those hours, the individuals or couples or families that were visiting were usually there by themselves. So it's a kind of safe experience during a pandemic. Because our space is outside, our exhibits are mostly based on large format, digitally printed signage, and it can go anywhere. Even museums that are normal indoor museums could add this kind of signage to their outdoor spaces, and I think many did during the pandemic. So a self-guided outdoor space can be an alternative to an indoor museum space, and it has limitations, but it can be a great way to complement whatever your indoor offering is. Digital signage can also be reproduced. We have created signage for other locations, and we have produced lower cost versions for use in schools. We made, for example, sets of signs that schools could have and rotate through the different classrooms throughout the year. And it's sort of the educational equivalent of an in-store display made by a food brand and given to grocery stores. Digital content can also be used as the basis for books. And a lot of the time we would have spent at the museum, we spent on books instead over the last couple of years. A couple of them are companions to the wildlife and plant content that we have at the museum. So those providing those subjects in book form, but we did also books on other topics, and we were able to do 10 books in English and 8 French translations of those books. And the way we could do it was use print on demand. So it's a kind of digital printing that allows you to print individual copies. So instead of a traditional printing press where you might need to produce 1,000 copies to be cost effective, we could make smaller quantities of more different books. So maybe between 50 and 400 is what we ordered, and we can reorder them when we need them. And they're always available worldwide. And the quality and pricing of print on demand has improved a lot in the last decade. And these books were done in full color with lots of photos and illustrations. So it's a really versatile channel. Books can be passed on. They can be shared in a classroom or library. And as much as people think that kids respond best to tablets or videos or games, we've seen that kids love books like this, and they also are fully functional with no need for an extra device or power or internet access. We're doing also coloring and activity books that tie into our exhibits and our other content. They're printed in black and white, so they're even more affordable, and we can distribute thousands of them to kids every year. This also gives us a way of sharing information with kids who are maybe still too young for some of our other materials. So it's sort of a new channel for reaching a specific audience of younger kids. I think the adaptations we made over the last year and a half have really prepared us for success in the future. Even if we go back to having staffed hours at the museum, we also know now that we can leave it open all day, every day. We will keep making copies of materials, and we're looking for other opportunities to create temporary or permanent exhibitions in other locations on the island to reach more of the public. We develop books that tie into our exhibits, and teachers can use these books in the classroom before and after visits, or even if they can't visit. And in many cases, the book we made is the best or only local curriculum on the topic. Book and exhibit content can obviously complement and inspire each other. We've done books based on exhibits and exhibits based on books. And a book is really actually a great way to release an expanded version when there's too much content to include in an exhibit. We have a few keys to success that we've identified. One is the ability to untether content from physical objects or artworks or artifacts. For us, this was easy because we don't really have a real collection, but we do have a lot of photos we can use, especially of nature. We can also take our own photos of any items that we do have. And with this, we can present topics with engaging visuals without having to show or put at risk a physical item. We also blend subjects together to create something engaging without having an actual artwork or artifact. We can't display actual artworks because all our stuff is outside and unattended, but we can make exhibits about art. We created an exhibit showing the etchings of a local artist that he did in our town in previous decades. And we combined it with excerpts from interviews we did with him. And he talked about the places and people he was recording and his life at the time and his artistic process. The etchings ended up being reproduced at many times life size, which is an interesting way to see the detail. And then put with the narrative that we got from him, it becomes not an exhibit of art, but it's an exhibit about the art. And it's also really an exhibit about the town. So you can make it something that's pretty fascinating without seeing the original pieces themselves. We're obsessed with writing for accessibility. So we test and refine our writing to reach accessibility goals, basically 8th or 9th grade for exhibit and book text, lower for coloring books or activity books. And this makes our exhibits accessible to many people. And we also know that we can use the text in materials for schools. The 8th to 9th grade is the average reading level for adults in the US, and we're on a multilingual island. So even though we present everything in English and French, for many people here, neither of those languages are their primary language. I think there's really no way to overestimate the importance of accessible writing. We can do our own digital design and production, so we can create our own books and exhibit panels, and we have a partner we work with and trust to do the printing itself. We also have some companies or freelance partners for things like illustration or photography, transcription, and translation. So you really don't need to have every capability in-house as long as you have someone that you can work with. Usage rights are also something to consider. We started with content that we created ourselves, so we could always repurpose it if we wanted to. As we do more collaborative work, it'll probably be more complicated. Right now, we request for each use. So an interview or a photo for an exhibit maybe would not be available to use in a book, but we want everyone to be informed and happy and feel respected. Obviously, the other option is to anticipate all the possible uses and then request rights for all those uses at the beginning. Expanding into other channels is a lot of extra work, but at the same time, there are efficiencies if you are able to repurpose material to distribute via different channels. So a 40-page coloring book is also 40 coloring pages you could share online individually. You can also have them on location as an activity for visiting kids. Exhibit and book text can be adapted versions of each other. And I think if the hard part is telling a story in the first place, the research, the writing, collecting images, then sharing it in different ways is really about getting more from that initial hard work. Our organization is really just a few people volunteering the time we have available. So we still publish books, ran the museum, launched new exhibits, and that means there are a lot of things we're doing less of, like having no one staffing the museum and letting people explore it like a park. It's not perfect, but it has allowed us to do other things with that time. And for health and safety reasons, we also chose not to do events at all. So even ones that might have been permitted, and this freed up an amazing amount of time. So the pandemic forced us to take a break from some things, but we also make choices about how we invest our time, try to minimize the time on social media. We decided to focus on exhibits that are going to be seen for years and books that might be used for decades. And so when we create these things, we also create a lot of great content that we can share online. And so once a month, we spend a couple hours scheduling a bunch of posts to direct people towards what we think are our more important projects. And I think it's a good compromise to make, to have a presence on social media, but not become overwhelmed by it. And developing these skills and the capacity to do multi-channel sharing can open up a lot of opportunities. You could sell books in your location or online. You could do private label versions of books that could be done for sponsors or partners, like a bank could give away coloring books for kids, or a hotel could give a book to repeat guests. They're unique, engaging local products created by you, a respected institution. And it's easy to even create a special edition of a book with like your partner's content added right into the book. Your museum could sell and develop educational signage to enhance business areas or resorts or public areas. This could bring in revenue and also create awareness. You can partner with tourism or in-flight magazines and share some of your material as editorial content in exchange for promoting your museum. And basically your content could be in more places, reaching more people and promoting all the things that you do. There's a few resources here for book printing, testing readability, and where you might find help for graphics and illustrations. There's obviously a lot of alternatives to that as well. And I just want to say thank you. And now we're going to move into the live Q&A session, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I would also love to hear about things that you have done. Thanks.
Wow, that was such an informative presentation. So we're now, as Mark said, going to move to the live Q&A. I see a question in the chat already, and I've got one for Mark as well. So Mark, if you see the question in the chat, you can go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, so the question is from Michelle Torres Carmona. To confirm, your primary audience are local residents and you're looking to increase attendance to visitors to the island. And the answer is kind of no. I mean, like, our audience it's local kids and families, local people. And we love it's great to have other visitors, but we're not really deliberately pursuing that. Although I would say that anything you do to make a great experience for a group like local kids or whatever, if you're doing some storytelling and you're trying to create an engaging thing, it's going to be good for everyone. So, but we're not necessarily spending time directly targeting a tourist audience. So that was my answer.
Mark, my question is, what's happening now in St. Martin as it relates to the pandemic? Maybe you could give people a sense of, there's been a lot of lockdowns and up and down, and is everything back to normal for the museums?
You know, I would say that not everything is back to normal per se. We had, for example, the beginning of the school year was delayed on the French side of the island, and like a vacation was cut short in order to make up for that. So there's still certain sort of disturbances that are impacting the island. We definitely have had a low vaccination rate and a lot of deaths over the summer, especially. It's a little bit quieter now. And then I think just in terms of, from our point of view, there are a lot of things that we could do now that we kind of just choose not to do. Like, we have in the next month or two, like a bunch of school visits, but we're still not doing any other groups or mixing of big groups of adults just because there's so many people that are not vaccinated. So so like, things are not entirely back to normal, and we're also being a little more cautious than what the rules allow.
Sorry, folks, I have another question as well, and it relates to how you evaluate with whether what you're doing is working or not. Like, how do you benchmark yourself so you make sure you're a small museum, so you have to scale your resources, right? And figure out what works, what gives you the most value for what you're trying to do. How do you benchmark success?
That's a really good question. We don't spend a ton of time like going and surveying after people visit and stuff like that. We do have direct contact with a lot of teachers who are visiting with classes and stuff like that. So we're able to informally get information about what activities the kids are enjoying and this kind of thing. We also, as we are able to distribute books, we can get feedback from teachers and stuff on those materials and whether they're being used. We have like a really good response when we open up, like here's our schedule for the fall. Whoever wants to schedule a class. I mean, we're way overbooked for the next, we've filled up all our spaces and we have, maybe a dozen more teachers asking us for visits. So I think some of those things give us a good idea of what is working. And, we get feedback in person from the museum, obviously, people will be like, oh, this is really interesting, or like, I really like how these things were written and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I mean, we could probably do more to get feedback, although we're really literally a couple people, so we don't have a lot of resources to do, analytics sort of above and beyond. But I guess, being a small island helps too, because I run into people and they're like, oh, you're the guy who does this. And then they will tell me, oh, their impression of it, So we get that kind of feedback pretty regularly.
A museum of 2 people, that's not unusual, believe it or not. So,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
So everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. Oh, I see questions in the Q&A now showing up. Here we go. One question says, everyone was overusing social media during the pandemic. With your described scale down of your social media activities, how did you maintain contact with your audiences and keep them coming back?
Yeah, so I mean, so like basically our model, and I'm not saying it's a good model necessarily, but we do create a lot of content because we do, we're scanning old images, we have wildlife photography, we have a project on like sargassum where we have all these images of critters that are in the sargassum and stuff like that. So we generate a ton of content. So I'll make several hundred posts a month, but I just do it in like 2 hours at the beginning of the month with like Hootsuite, and then just schedule them all. And so they all go off. And so we have a lot of people, and a lot of people are liking the stuff or whatever, but we're just not crafting these detailed posts with a lot of written content and stuff for social media. We're just sharing sort of images that might get people interested. And then we try to link to whatever the resource is. Like we have a whole site of old images from St. Martin. So every post that's an old image will link to that site. And so if people want to really dig in deeper, there's a permanent place where they can go do that. So that's kind of our model for doing our social, is just try to have a lot of cool visual stuff, but do it with spending as little time as possible.
And as a follow-up to that, Shireen is asking, was it that your engagement was such that you were such a resource that social media wasn't greatly required?
Well, it's not clear to me. I mean, I feel like, I don't know what it's like on other islands. I mean, I would say on St. Martin, people use Facebook a lot, and maybe it's still more popular than it is even in the States and stuff like that. But to me, it's really just, I guess it's kind of our value judgment about what the long-term value of Facebook is versus spending time on something that could be a resource that's more permanent. One of the things we did in the last couple of years is we started a library, because after the Hurricane Irma, there were no libraries open. So we started developing a local research library, so collecting all the books that had been written by St. Martin people or about St. Martin as much as we could. And that kind of impressed upon me the fact that there are books, if you publish a book, even if there's probably only ever a few thousand copies made, that's something that it remains for decades. It remains for 100 years. It's the kind of thing that people can build on in terms of like information about an island and knowledge of a place. So I feel like seeing that compared to like, if you've ever tried to find something that was posted on Facebook a week ago and it's already kind of disappeared down a hole, like it just doesn't seem like it's like a very good value. Even if you get the immediate gratification of people liking or commenting, it's not clear to me that this is a way that you can really leverage to move forward. And I would also say it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's to me, it just doesn't seem like you get that much out of it in the end. And like the idea is to try to create things that are more permanent or that have like a more lasting value. which doesn't mean that it's not useful. I mean, also like you can advertise if you have an event or if you have something going on. It's very cheap to advertise on Facebook in the Caribbean compared to the US. So you could have a sponsored post if you really want to reach people. You don't have to like work really hard to do all of to create something with virality and spend all your time focused on that. If you have a message that you really want people to get, just pay $30 and everyone on the island will see it. It works on a small island and whatever it is for a larger island. I guess we have 5 minutes left. If anyone
Yeah.
has any last questions.
I do. I will just say that I love the whole presentation and what you're saying, because, you know, when the pandemic happened and that great word pivot came into our language, what are we pivoting towards? Everybody rushed to digital resources. And as you made clear during your presentation, there's a digital divide. Accessibility issues aren't the same for everybody. Do you see that? Have you seen as a realization of that in St. Martin changes made to either try to bridge the digital divide or to just think about other ways to give, other than what you're doing at your institution, other ways to give resources and programming?
I feel like, I mean, my impression is, I think people, there's a certain like, it just seems like we should be doing digital because that's what we see in the media around us. And I mean, people definitely still are working on digital. And I think it's important to bridge the digital divide. I'm not saying, I mean, we put everything out online too. You know, so it's not, you know, and I would love for St. Martin to be as digitally sophisticated as where, you know, South Korea or wherever is a digital place. I think that like there's also like here, and I don't know how much it is on other islands, there's a real emphasis on doing events and like in person, like festival or whatever. I mean, it's just like very few people think of something without a big opening event and stuff like this, you know, which is, I feel, obviously problematic when it comes to a pandemic situation, because everyone still wants to do an event, even though that has suddenly become a risky thing. So I'd say that's another sort of like thing where there's a cultural difference around like about what is possible and how do you use different channels and how do you, like, our focus has been to try to create spaces where you don't have to have like a super spreader kind of situation, which is also like a little different than the typical thing. But yeah, so I think that, I mean, it would be great if we could figure out the answer to all of these things. But I think it just, when you walk around the island, you know, it's a long time before everyone's going to be really able to use digital resources. And like, it's questionable whether you would focus on a digital resource the same way you would on a physical book that you're holding in your hand. I certainly don't, you know, I have trouble with that on my own computer. I grew up in a different time, you know.
Thanks. We're going to wrap up the session, Mark. That was such a great presentation. Lots of thank yous going on. I see a comment for Laurent. I want to make sure there's not a question there. I think it's more of a comment. Yeah, that's a wonderful point, Laurent. I want to thank you. Yeah, I love the way that you're kicking off the session today and the way it reflects the themes of the conference. I want to remind everybody that we have a lot of other concurrent sessions happening, so you can go to the next ones on the session. If you want to continue to talk with Mark, you can just click on the little networking tab on the left-hand side of the screen in Feed Loop, and you can ask him your questions personally. The next set of sessions are challenges around interpreting and preserving a former slave colonial site with Katarina Jacobson from the Museum Home, working collaboratively to bring digitized collections to life, and facilitating community wellness at the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. We'll see you over there in the next sessions. Thank you, Mark.
Bye. Thanks.